Oh, good morning, everyone. Australia has a federal election next Saturday, the 21st of May. Now, in Australia, we have a preferential voting system, which I think the Americans call ranked voting. So you have to number all the candidates. There is a variation of that in the Senate. You don't have to number all the candidates, but it's still ranked. It's still preferential voting. And I highly recommend that you do number at least all of the parties above the line, put them in order that you prefer, or vote below the line if you want to change the order within the parties or between the parties. You like this candidate from this party more than you like some of the other candidates in that party, and there's other candidates you like in other parties that you want to mix and match a little bit between the parties. For example, Amanda Stoker in Queensland, I would put above Matt Canavan, and I would put, I'd put One Nation. Personally, I'd put One Nation up with with Amanda Stoker, and UAP. I might even put above Matt Canavan, but I would put Clive Palmer lower. I don't like Clive Palmer as a person, but I like a lot of the people that are in his party. So that's how I would mix things up. If I voted below the line, I haven't decided yet, and maybe we'll get to that later. So let's review this video by Martyn Iles. As I do it, I will be typing. So there may be some interruptions in this, and at the end of it, I will have provided a list of all the parties he mentions and what he says about them. And he knows more about them than I do. So we shall see what happens. I probably won't be able to add much to that. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this, is because I don't know. Just opening up a Word document here. Well, not Word, it's actually OpenOffice, so that I can type this up. Let's get Martyn up on the screen. And let's start listening.
G'day, it's Martyn Iles here, coming to you again with some useful election information for the federal election on the 21st of May. This election information is all about the parties which are going to be on your ballot, which you can't recognise and you don't know what they stand for, because there's a lot of them on the Senate ballot, no matter who you are, and there may be a lot of them.
Now, he doesn't do all of them. He tries to do the ones that are nationwide. So you may have, he does mention Australian Christians, which are only in WA, because he ranks them highly. And I agree with him. They should be higher. But yeah, there are ones like Katter's Australia Party, who are pretty much only in Queensland. They're only in some place. I don't know how many candidates they are running, and lots of other smaller parties.
On your reps ballot, your little green piece of paper as well. Whether you vote above or below the line of the Senate, whether you do 1 to 6 with the parties or 1 to 12 with the individual candidates, which you should do, by the way, because it's all about putting the right people into the Senate, regardless of their party, so that we've got people of strong values and so on.
All right, so he's saying to vote below the line in the Senate as well. But I would vote more than 12. You don't have to vote all of them. You need to vote until you've helped elect 6 senators. So you need to, it needs to be down until we're distinguishing who gets the 6th position. How do you know that? Well, you don't. So number all of them. or at least until you get, I don't know. Yeah, until you get past halfway, that should be more than enough. Get a little bit past, at least 2/3 is important. But if you know how many candidates there is, you can start numbering from the end as well, the ones that you least want to be there, that definitely shouldn't be there, from the least to back to the middle. And if you muck it up, go back and ask for another ballot paper. You can do that. And you say, oh, it takes time. This is the future of the country we're talking about. Babies are being murdered. This is important. Religious freedom is being taken away. Marriage has been redefined. This is important. You can spend a couple of extra minutes. You can spend half an hour once every 2 or 3 years. And, if you include state elections, once every 1 or 2 years, and then local elections once a year on average, you can spend half an hour for the future of the country to defend the righteousness of God on earth. Now, you may not be a Christian, you may not agree with me on that, but I'm still making a point, however you view things. This is important. The future of our country. Take time to think about it. Take time to do it properly. Do it right.
Because they're kind of all over the place, and they also shape the parties by being there. Whether you do either of those things, you've got to get to a point.
Now, unless someone tells you, or you find out somehow yourself who are the better people, what he's saying here, because he doesn't tell us that Amanda Stoker, for example, should be ranked higher than Matt Canavan, for example. And that One Nation should also be higher than Matt Canavan, in my opinion.
In your numbering, where you start to sort of run out of certainty, where most of us, don't worry about that, by the way. Most of us have like 4. And then we go, oh dear, now we're scratching and we're looking for where to go.
Well, some people only go Liberal or Labor. That's most people. And they go, I don't know anything about these ones. And then they just start to go random. But Liberal or Labor aren't making the country better. There's almost no difference between the two parties. Now, on some issues, one is clearly worse than the other. And on some issues, most issues, there's no difference. But there's a lot of difference with the other parties. Massive amounts of difference. I would strongly recommend that you put smaller parties above larger parties. But there are some smaller parties that should be at the end of the list. There's definitely a wide spectrum, and Liberal and Labor tend to sit in the middle and try and compete for the centre, whatever the centre is. Centre's just a made-up. Centre's just the average.
You'll start to get to a point where you may not recognize the names of the parties. And sometimes people vote on party name because of the way it sounds. However, behind every party name is an ideology. And so that's what this video is about. I want to tell you a little bit about the ideologies behind the names of the parties you're going to see on your ballot so you don't make a big fat mistake. So I have done my best to rank these from left to right on a big pendulum.
And g'day, Kevin.
All the parties, or pretty much all of them. By left, I mean woke. And by right, I mean...
For the benefit of my American audience, Martyn Iles is the head of Australian Christian Lobby, which is a lobby group in Canberra and in the state capitals as well, lobbying the politicians, lobbying Parliament, federally and in the state capitals, on issues of concern to biblical Christians. Now, there are people say he doesn't represent all Christians. Yeah, because there are Christians, people who couldn't care less about what the Bible says about things. They want to follow their own heart. But Martyn Iles is a conservative. He's against abortion. He disagreed. He fought against the changing of the definition of marriage because I do not call it gay marriage. It's not marriage. The government has redefined marriage to mean something that marriage is not. What else? There's heaps of other issues as well. And as a general rule, he would be a conservative, a Christian conservative. I would strongly agree with him on almost everything. and his group, ACL, Australian Christian Lobby. Anyway, let's keep going.
Mean conservative in values, social values, right? By left, I mean also big government control,
Marxism,
and so on.
Communism, fascism. Now, he does get that mixed up a little bit. He thinks that white nationalism is conservative. He's wrong. White nationalism, as in fascism or Nazism, specifically actually Nazism, but it is a form of fascism, has never, ever, 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 ever been conservative. That is a lie that we are constantly being told. It has always been Marxist, which is leftist. It is another form of Marxism, like communism and socialism. It is actually socialism, national socialism. And imbeciles, as soon as I say that, or just because it's called that, doesn't mean it is. Well, no, I'm happy to call it that because that is what it is. And I can show you that is what it is. They nationalized healthcare. They didn't nationalize industry. That's the difference between communism and fascism, is that they don't take over the ownership of the means of industry, the businesses, the factories, etc. They don't own them. They still control them, though. They come in and they will take ownership of that person and give it to another person, but they didn't nationalize them. That's the only real difference. In every other area, they are still Marxist. They are still, everybody needs to be on the same page. Everybody needs to support the government, big government. Hitler had very big government. It wasn't a small government. Right? They're a big government. They're leftist in every single respect. And the only difference between them and communism is international socialism, right? That it's supposed to be the proletariat across the whole world rising up. But in practice, communism in Russia was nationalistic. It was focused on Stalin and Russian socialism. In practice, there's no difference in pragmatically how communism and fascism come about. They're both nationalistic in practice.
By right, I mean libertarian freedom, free speech, small government, that kind of thing. So there is a wokeometer at play here, and there's a freedomometer at play.
So wokeometer, how woke is the party? Right? So on the morals, where do they stand? 1. 2, how free versus big government are they? And they're not always the same thing. They do frequently align, but not always. Sometimes a party might be quite woke in its ideology, but it's a very small government. And we'll get to the Liberal Democrats. They are an example of quite woke in many ways. They support abortion. They support the redefinition of marriage. They support euthanasia. They support lots of woke ideas, leftist social theory, moral theory, but they're very small government. So they're a bizarre mix. They're very difficult. Well, where do I put them on the ballot? I don't know. They might be good for shaking things up a little bit. And then once they start to get a bit of power, if they become too leftist in practice, okay, well, let's drop them back down the ballot again.
Play here. High woke, low freedom, left. Low woke, high freedom, right. Okay? Now, here's the problem. Those two things don't always occur together. There are a couple of outliers. So there's one that we'll get to where, for example, it'll be high on freedom and high on woke. It's all right. I'll clarify
Liberal Democrats
that when I get there and explain why I put them where I did on the pendulum. But anyway, that's enough of that. Without further ado, I think that's all my introductory material. Yes, it is.
I wish he'd show it on the screen. He's obviously looking at something. He could have drawn this up so that we can see it.
Look. it's a rough guide. I mean, one might be slightly out of order or the other, but I think it's pretty reliable. It's not bad overall. Oh, that's right. I knew there was something. I meant to say, my benchmark for this has been the conventional view that Labor is centre left and Liberal is centre right. You will disagree.
So we've got two major parties in Australia, Labor and Liberal. Labor is considered to be centre left and Liberal is considered to be centre right. And as a general rule, that seems to be broadly true.
I know, but I had to get some objective plumb line, some benchmarking point from which to work this. Otherwise, what do we mean by left and right? We don't know. One man's extreme right.
Well, right is conservative and left is Marxist.
Right is another man's sort of middle left. We've got to know where we're coming from.
So really, all we're doing is putting them in an order. The labels don't really matter, except that we've put them on a line, and we call this extreme left and that extreme right. Although no, we don't call it extreme right because that doesn't make any sense. Extremely conservative, extreme and conservative are opposites. And this is why, once again, why I hate the idea of fascism and Nazism being extreme right. There's no such thing. Conservatives aren't extreme. Those two terms are opposite. When you say far right, you mean the most conservative, the most correct. That's another meaning of the word right, but it's appropriate. Conservatives are people who are right. They're right on government theory, they're right on social theory, they're right on moral theory, they're right on economic theory, which are the four areas of politics, and there's overlap between those. Small government, free markets, social conservatism, conserving traditional values, which is the moral values we need to conserve. But I mention them separately because there is a little bit of difference between them. There are things that aren't covered by the individual label of moral or social. So I include both to cover everything.
So I've said Labor is centre left, Liberal is centre right for the sake of argument, and I've benchmarked these on that, around that spectrum. Okay, so without further ado, starting with the extreme left, and there's only one party in the extreme left category.
Socialist Alliance. So they are the worst. Okay, so extreme left. Socialist Alliance.
They are the Socialist Alliance. And the reason I put them in the extreme left category, which sounds a bit critical, right? But it's because they are anarchists. They believe in violence, they believe in anarchy, they believe in all sorts of really nasty stuff like that. And you'll say to me, well,
this is the problem with anarchy. Anarchy is supposed to be extremely freedom oriented. You can do whatever you want. But the problem with actual anarchy is that it allows room for scum like this. These neo-Nazi, neo-communist, fascistic scum to bully other people around them and take their freedom. Actual anarchy, in the sense of freedom, cannot exist. That's why we need small government. We need a police force. We need law and order. We need the judiciary. We need scum like this to be thrown in jail or executed so that people can live freely. Real anarchy cannot exist. So as soon as someone starts talking about anarchy, they're either ignorant and living in an idealistic fairyland, or they're one of these scumbags who are actually neo-communists trying to destroy the social order. And it doesn't matter which one you are. If you're fighting violently for this, or even intellectually fighting for this, you're going to support communism or fascism. And really, there's no difference between those two. The only difference between the two is what will the leader actually do when he gets there. Doesn't matter what the theory is, the person who has the power will do whatever that person wants to do, and it won't matter anymore. Someone will come into power, and you will help that as an anarchist. Anarchism is extremely evil stupidity, and it's stupidity at best. It might be just extremely evil awareness that you're being extremely evil.
Hang on, that's not left. That's surely, I mean, anarchy is what you get on the right. When
So
you
he's now going
government.
to explain it a slightly different way.
But this kind of anarchy is different. Maybe anarchy is a bad word. It basically is the use of violence and anarchist methods in the pursuit of the objectives of the Socialist Alliance, or indeed the objectives of the state, if they were to be in government. That's why you get all these violent protests and nastiness in the US. There is a kind of left wing that is violent.
And they want to pretend that they're for freedom. That they're liars. They're not for freedom. They're for controlling you to do what they want, what they believe is right. So in a sense, Martyn is right. We shouldn't call it anarchist. But I know of nobody who's actually anarchist. And even if they were actually anarchists, they're only helping these violent scumbags. Well, they're free to do that. Right, well, I'm free to shoot them then. But in our society, I'm not. I would be the one that goes to jail for trying to kill them. Kyle Rittenhouse. Well, he didn't go to jail, did he? Because he didn't disobey the law. But in Australia, I can't shoot people in self-defense. I've got to let them kill me. We live in a stupid world. Kyle Rittenhouse can be thankful that he was in Pennsylvania, which if he was in California, he'd probably be in jail. If he had done it in California or New York. If I remember correctly, it was Pennsylvania, wasn't it? Anyway, let's keep going.
And that's where they are. They're, extreme left. Anyway, moving into very left wing, there are several. Firstly, the Greens.
Right. So next is a party, let's call it very left wing. Greens, Reason, who used to be called the Sex Party. He's going to get to it shortly.
Say no more. Secondly, a party called Reason, you may have heard of.
Say no more. Well, everyone should be aware. If you're not aware of how left-wing the Greens are, well, please get educated quickly. There's no excuse for someone to be that unaware of how left-wing, how extreme, how Marxist they are. They hate Christianity. They support Islam. They hate conservative economics. They hate conservative social policy. They hate conservative morals. They're very big government. They hate coal-generated power, which is the safest. Well, no, the second safest, because nuclear is actually the safe. Nuclear is the best, and they hate that even more. We don't have nuclear in Australia because people are so scared of it and ignorant about how safe nuclear actually is. Nuclear is the safest, the most economical, the least polluting. So it's the most environmental, it's the most green. And coal is the second best for the amount of power that we need. Now, interestingly, the biggest supporters of the Greens are in the city that uses the most power. So if you're truly green, what are you doing in a concrete jungle? You ignorant, moronic scumbags. Get out of the concrete jungle, go live out in the city, stop using power, stop driving a vehicle. Stop relying on the government. If you really cared about the environment, go help a farmer protect his land. But they hate farmers. They hate, food production. They hate, well, they hate meat eating. They're frequently vegetarians or vegans or... Okay, we'll go set up yourself a little farm where you grow all of your own vegetable food, but you're not allowed to use anything from Western civilization that you're trying to destroy. Stop being a hypocrite.
Be called the Sex Party, but decided that wasn't winning them much credibility, so they call themselves Reason. They pretend to be these civil libertarians. You're all free to be a hedonist and live how you please, but truthfully, they're pretty comprehensively woked out, woked, that is, and they have
woked. This subtitles, they're not very good at picking up what he's actually saying. Awoke. No, he said woked. And they're like the Greens, they're extremely anti-Christian. Now, he says anti-religion. No, they have a secularist religion. They're not anti-religion. They're anti the true religion. Martyn, you should be better than this, Martyn.
Have an overt anti-religion, a hard secularist, deliberately anti-faith, anti-religion platform. Big concern.
No, anti-Christian. Anti-Christian. Betcha they're pro-Islam.
Very left wing. Also, Animal Justice Party. They're the
Animal Justice Party. Forgot about them. Animal Justice Party. Righto.
Greens for animal lovers. It's a blunt way to describe it, but it works. There's a party here called the Citizens Party, and you say to me, Citizens Party? Interesting. Well, they're full-blown communists, okay? They just are. They couldn't call themselves the Communist Party, except that the guy that they follow, he's a bit more nuanced than that, but they are communists.
Yes, that's my experience with them. They claim to be democratic. They never have been. They did get infiltrated by the... not the closed, because there's open brethren, closed brethren, and then there's the more extreme ones. But that brethren cult group infiltrated them at one point. But yeah, they're communists. They're bizarre, really bizarre. And they're liars. So steer well clear of them. They will try to appeal to Christians and to, we're democratic. No, they're not.
Fusion Party, very left.
Yes, Fusion Party. So there's a lot of these, very left.
That is an alliance of several smaller parties that got together. The Science Party, the Secular Party, the Pirate Party, the Climate...
Sorry, I want to type these all down. Science Party, the Secular Party, the Pirate Party, the Climate Change Party. And I noticed that when they first appeared, the Fusion Party, and they claim to be democratic as well, but they're not. They've already determined, and they skew how they ask you the questions so that you can't give a sensible answer.
Change Justice Party and the Climate Emergency Action.
The Climate Change Justice Party and the Climate Emergency Action Party, all under the banner of the Fusion Party. So why are you separate parties? But anyway,
they're woke on.
Alliance, not party. Alliance. Very woke on social justice issues.
Social policy, they're pretty full-blown climate warriors. They believe in universal basic income. But here's the other thing. Like Reason, they have a...
and I got a text message from a party yesterday, and I actually responded to it. They've ignored my response so far, but what do you expect? The First Nations Justice Party. And they think I'm still in Durack, imbeciles.
An overt, deliberate, aggressive, anti-faith, anti-religion, pro-secularist platform, which would set Christian folk and the church in this country, and they work back quite big time. So that's the very left. Moving into left wing. So this is just solid left-wing parties, or solidly left-wing parties. I've put here Democratic Alliance, having said.
So now left wing. So are you putting Labor? I don't remember him mentioning Labor when I listened to this. So left wing. Democratic Alliance.
Solidly left wing. They're actually a bit nuanced. This is Drew Pavlo's outfit, the guy from the University of Queensland. They're anti-China and they're fairly libertarian, but they're full-blown woke. So you say, well, how does that work?
Full-blown woke. Its subtitles make it full-blown work. What?
Good question. Drew's a pretty young guy. Maybe he hasn't thought himself through. The fact of the matter is, though, I've had to say left overall because of the woke aspect of and I can't get around that. So Democratic Alliance I put in the left. Australian Progressive, pretty mainstream woke platform.
Australian Progressive.
Sustainable Australia, they believe in a total coal mine.
Sustainable Australia.
Ban, free university, they're very high taxing, full-blown climate change and all that kind of stuff. So Sustainable Australia is definitely left. Also of the left, I put the Indigenous Aboriginal Party.
Indigenous Aboriginal Party. First Nations. What did they call themselves? First Nations Justice. It's in there somewhere to the left.
Not because I have anything against Indigenous and Aboriginal causes. Obviously, we all believe in a better life.
But that better life will come through capitalism, not through Marxism. That better life will come through conservatism, through conservative policies, through building up the family, through reducing the flawed parts of Aboriginal culture that have been allowed to become flawed because of the lack of influence of Christianity and the leftist influence. Leftists aren't helping Aboriginal people. They're making the problems worse and worse and worse. We keep talking about closing the gap, and we haven't closed the gap one tiny little bit because of our leftist approach. Keep throwing welfare money at them. Don't fix the real problems, which is the breakdown of the family and the lack of justice. The lack of criminalising crime.
For Indigenous people and the cause there, but this is a very woke view of that issue. It's
same as for minority groups in America. Exactly the same problem, whether it's the Indigenous people of America or African Americans in America.
Identity politics driven, more critical race theory, say, than something more balanced. So I'll put them on the left. Centre left. This is where Labor now comes in. Labor's pretty wokish,
I wouldn't call Labor centre left. And I might even be inclined to put some of these parties above Labor. Just to shake things up a bit.
They pretend not to be at elections, but they really are. They're quite statist. You look at the red versus blue states in terms of COVID response, and you will find, for those who watched this, that consistently the red states were more draconian, harsher, and continue.
By the way, in Australia, red is Labor, red is Communist, and blue is Conservative. So it's flipped over for those from America.
You to be more statist.
Because blue is Liberal.
More like the government has the answer. Sit down and shut up, little guy, while we, crush you with government power.
Yeah, which was Victoria and Western Australia and Queensland and South Australia and Tasmania, I think. Okay. Is Tasmania ruled by Labor at the moment? Whereas New South Wales is run by the Liberals at the moment.
So, that's kind of they're not hard full on, but they're centre left. TNL, you're going to see a party called TNL. I think, who's that? I think it stands for the New Liberals. They're Labour-ish, centre-left. Or if Labour's centre-left, then they're centre-left. Then centrist.
Centrist.
I'm suspicious of parties who sound centrist or bill themselves as centrist. This is the kind of party that says, yeah, look, we don't care either way. We just go with wherever all the expert testimony does and all the consulting does and the institutions and the process that have been set up by the Democratic.
So they have no principles. They don't stand for anything. Centrists, in Martyn Iles' experience.
Process and all of that. We go with where it takes us. And we're centrist. We're these data-driven, democratically driven, institutionally driven, process-driven people. I don't believe it.
Yeah, I think it's a lie too. I think they're pretending that they're centrists, but they're actually woke leftists.
Okay? I just don't believe it. I find parties in the past that have styled themselves as centrist have been hiding something else. But nonetheless, I have to say, based on what I know, Australian Democrats, centre.
Australian Democrats still exist. I thought they'd cease to exist. Well, there you go. Australian Democrats. It's still there.
Australian Values Party, you may not have heard of them.
Australian Values Party. What are Australian values? Look, they're whatever people say they are, so it doesn't mean anything.
Pretty vanilla, middle of the road, status quo kind of people. Very balanced, very moderate. I'm sus.
I'm sus. Obsess. Moderate. I'm sus.
Centre right. Let's move over on to just tipping.
Right. So centre right. Centre right. Bold.
Into the right side of the spectrum, according to the benchmark I chose. Liberal National Coalition.
Liberal National Coalition. So in Queensland, that's now one party, the Liberal National Party. In every other state, Liberals and Nationals are separate parties. So you may rank Nationals higher than Liberals, but it doesn't really matter. It comes down to the individual candidates, really, the difference between Liberal and National. Some of the Liberal candidates can be very woke, very liberal in the new sense of the word. Some of them are very liberal in the old sense of the word. Same with National, which used to be the country party. They don't care about the country anymore. They're just trying to attract votes from the country to support the Liberals, who are becoming more and more liberal in the new sense of the word, more and more leftist. But they claim to be centre-right. They don't actually do anything really centre-right.
They're not woke, but they are lethargic as to...
Some of them are very woke. And this is where it gets down to the candidates, but he's not telling us about the candidates. how woke the candidates are.
Wokeness on the whole. They just let it happen. Oh, it's the economy, stupid. Don't worry about all that. Don't worry about society going.
So we say that we're against abortion, but we don't actually do anything about it. Like, it's the same problem that Americans have with the Republicans. They're a mix of, some of them pretend that they're conservative, but they're actually woke, and some of them are actually conservatives and are doing their best to fight. But, they can't end abortion on their own. It needs to be a majority, and there isn't a majority because the whole of the Democratic Party supports abortion, and about half the Republican Party just goes, yeah, we don't care. We're just here to get as much money as we can and to stay in power.
Got a pot. It's all about the economy. That's kind of where they're at.
We have the same problem in Australia with the Liberal and Labor parties. But then we've got all these smaller parties, like One Nation, who do have members, and they tend to be very anti-woke, very anti-Marxist, tend to be. In fact, I'll be putting One Nation very, very high.
They do a reasonable attempt at free marketing, I suppose, although less and less, and they believe in slightly more freedoms than Labor do. Then you have the
or at least claim that they do.
Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP. I've put them centre-right. Very, very hard to classify, I have to say. This could even be wrong. But they are definitely of the right in terms of full-blown free market, full-blown freedoms, liberties, maximum freedom of religion, maximum freedom of speech. Never vote for a policy that increases taxes. Get the government out of the way, grind the government down, move them into something small, something manageable, and something that doesn't bother us in our lives. I'll tell you what, I'm very sympathetic to that because increasingly we're looking for that kind of freedom for Christians to function in their beliefs and convictions. So they're very much of the right in that respect. There's a curiosity here, which is that they seem to pursue some woke or left-wing social policy. So you will find a lot of Liberal Democrats will pursue euthanasia and try and introduce it into Parliament. They will pursue the regulation of prostitution and the
deregulation of prostitution,
industry and things like that. They will pursue deregulation, decriminalisation, opening up of gambling and things. You find, they'll pursue decriminalisation of drugs, and you go, oh, that's left wing. But see, this is the funny thing: they're not doing it for left wing reasons. They're doing it because they actually just believe shrink the government, get the government out of that space, less government.
And I'm not completely opposed to that. However, drugs should be criminalized where they reduce freedoms for other people. If drugs cause people to become violent so that they harm other people, and here's the other reason drugs should be criminalized in a society where we provide free healthcare. If you have socialized medicine, then you must criminalize drugs that harm the individual. So if you really want to decriminalize drugs, then get the government out of healthcare. And that's that person's responsibility. If they want to kill themselves, you can't stop people from killing themselves. Right? Now, as an individual, I say we should, but that's not the government's job. It's not the government's job to be a nanny state and to be mother for everyone. That's not the government's job. They can't do it. They do it really badly. So get the government out of it. Get the government out of welfare. Get the government out of healthcare. It's not the government's job. Now, they need to push that first before they go decriminalizing drugs. Liberal Democrats have it the wrong way around.
Government employees, less government work, less government size. I think truly they overestimate the human nature.
Yes, they think that humans are basically good because they're not Christians. Liberal Democrats are not Christians. And that's their fundamental problem. That's why they're so confused. They're libertarians who do not understand that human beings are sinners. Christian libertarians are much more sensible people. Although I wouldn't call myself a libertarian, I have some views that are libertarian because I'm a conservative. And by conservative, I mean upholding conservative values, trying to take society back to what God originally planned. That's what I mean by conservative. I don't mean upholding what happened yesterday, no matter what it was. Trying to conserve something from yesterday or last year. No, go back to the original traditional values. That's my definition of conservatism. I'm a Christian conservative. So do what God wants. That's my definition of conservative. Or what I believe God wants, of course.
And I think people are better than they are. That's what I think is the failing there. But I've put them centre right. There's so much going for them. There's some stuff that I really don't like. So hard to classify. I reckon centre right. And also, on my other video, you'll see a lot of Christians have got into the LDP. So to a large degree, the direction on those social issues will depend on who from the LDP gets elected. Okay? It depends on the individuals. And there are a number of Christians. Okay. Also on the centre right.
So once again, we need to know our candidates. But that is extremely difficult. How do you get to know your candidates? I don't know. Ring them all individually in the couple of weeks before the election and ask them numerous questions. Who has time for that? Who has the money for that? See, this is when democracy becomes a joke. How can you really make an informed decision? No, nobody seems to care.
Right, I've put Australian Christians. If you're in Western Australia, you will see them on your Senate ballot. You may see them on your House of Reps ballot. They're only in Western Australia. Very much, I would say, kind of like ACL in terms of their views and convictions. So if you know us, you know them, mostly. Okay, now I'm going to move into the centre-right to right wing. Not quite. I'm not prepared to say that this is full right, but it's centre-right to right wing. I'm going to put here the Australian Federation Party. The Australian Federation Party is of the right in the sense that they are incredibly democratised. It's all about having a town hall meeting in every electorate, having citizen-initiated referenda, having all sorts of super grassroots-focused democratisation of process and politics. There's a very strong focus on maximum liberty. They're big on freedoms. They're anti all the COVID stuff that's been going on, the lockdowns and all that. But the other side of it is that they're fairly big on welfare. They do have some stuff about anthropogenic global warming. They have protectionist economic policies, which you'll find from here on with most of the parties. There's some protectionism in there. So that's to be contrasted with the idea that we're in part of some global big free market. And the Australian market doesn't need hedging about with tariffs and controls and regulations to make sure manufacturing stays here and farmers don't go out of business. There's an argument. Everyone agrees that would be a great idea. There's an argument whether it works. But some people will try for that, to be a bit more insular economically. Others will try and be much more free and open and global. So they're more protectionists. That's just to explain that issue. But there's a weird thing with the Australian Federation Party. They want to make animals at law sentient beings, which is bizarre. That starts to give animals rights, and it's messy, right? It's a woke idea, and I just don't know why it crept in there. But anyway, that's the Australian Federation Party. I'm going to say centre right to right because they're very right on some things, but they just are pulled back on a few others. So that's where I land with them. Centre right to right, I'm also going to put Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. I think this is what the Nationals...
Yeah, what the Nationals used to be.
would be if they weren't tethered to the Liberals. There's not a trace of woke in these people. They have a strong focus on liberty. They're very much straight down the line on opposing a lot of what happened with COVID, the lockdowns and the vaccines and all that, in a way that's not, they're not, they're just saying pro-choice, freedom, liberty, right? Then where am I?
Not pro-choice in terms of abortion, just freedom.
They have a strong rural interest. They support shooting, fishing, farming. They support mining. They're very Australia first, pretty balanced in terms of foreign policy, environmental policy, and that. No trace of ideology, no trace of woke that I can find. And look, Who doesn't love country people? I honestly do. I wish I was one.
Well, fools don't love country people. Country people are awesome.
You know, if you know me, that I definitely am not. But yeah, I just really appreciate the down-to-earth nature, the practical nature, the non-ideological nature of rural folks. And the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party is a party of the bush, for the bush. And in that, I appreciate that they're for the city too, because they're not woke. They've got good values. So centre right to right, Shooter, Fishers, Farmers Party. Then we go into the right. Might have betrayed a bit too much sympathy for them, to be honest. But anyway, then we move into the right. And I think squarely right-wing parties, and I don't mean that's a pejorative term these days, like a criticism. I don't mean it like that. I just mean that they are right-wing in their beliefs and their views of the right compared to the benchmarks that I set. One Nation. Pretty consistently right-wing, I'd say, on their policy. Consistently not woke. The thing
I notice more right, more correct than everybody else so far. One Nation.
thing about One Nation, which will contrast them with a couple of the others that I've mentioned on the right of the spectrum, is that they are engaged in the culture wars. They have a pro-life policy, for example.
Pro-life, anti-abortion, anti the murder of babies.
It's not something you find with many of the others, I think one other. They do engage in culture wars, so their not wokeness is much more manifest because they actually talk about those sorts of issues.
Yeah, they're very anti-woke, very anti-Marxist, very anti-communist. And not in the way the fascists were. We're not for beating people up. So don't try and classify us as fascists.
Most other parties avoid it, and it depends on the individual candidates. So they're not woke at all. They are silent about a couple of things, but not as many as others. Maximum freedom. There's a little bit of economic protectionism in.
Yeah, they are a bit economic protectionist, and I'm not completely free trade when it comes to protecting Australia's industries, because free trade can destroy Australia's industries. Because if other countries, this is where I like the way that Trump approached it, that he threatened economic protectionism to try to increase free trade. Right? He didn't just, we're going to protect America. The best way to protect it is free trade. But if you do free trade and the other people aren't, you don't have free trade. So you actually have to have free trade for free trade to be good. And so you have to play with economic protectionism to try to protect the industries in your country. But free trade is better than protectionism. Anyway.
In there, but they're pretty consistently run-of-the-mill right-wing. I would say the same about the United Australia Party. I'm a little...
Yeah, so United Australia Party, I think, has been established to undermine One Nation. But what they say they stand for, good.
Concerned about the UAP's personality cult thing.
By the way, there's a little bit of a personality cult with One Nation as well. They're not just called One Nation, they're called Pauline Hanson's One Nation. So both of them have a bit of a personality cult thing going on that we need to be cautious about. But I think Pauline Hanson is a far better human being than Clive Palmer. Clive Palmer.
If you go to their website, the stuff it says about Clive and the presentation of Clive is a bit icky and not true. But anyway, it's amazing.
And not true. So they lie about their leader. That sounds familiar. Adolf Hitler. But heaps of Christians are supporting it. So if those Christians get elected, good. If they're actually Christians. See, this is the problem. How careful is Martyn Iles being about his use of the word Christians here? I don't know. Martyn Iles, I don't know. He seems to be inconsistent. He has a very consistent definition of what Christian means when he gets to explain the gospel. He gives it very clearly. We're all sinners. Christ died for our sins.
Christians have got into the UAP. Heaps. And so get the right people elected. It could be a Christian party. It's pretty incredible. But they're consistently, I think, of the right economically. They're
Yes, I think economics is their big focus. I don't know how focused they are socially, like traditional moral values, those sort of things. But yeah, they're more economically right. Whereas I think One Nation is more solidly right wing across the board, except for the economic protectionism. But I understand why there's economic protectionism there, because of how China plays the markets. And so free market, there is no free market. So I think you do need to have some economic protectionism, but yeah.
big on solid economic foundations and free markets and all that. Bit of protectionism, a little bit, particularly on a few key issues, which draw them back. But also, they don't say much about social policy, so it's hard.
Right. Whereas One Nation does. So One Nation is better than UAP. They are firmly anti-abortion. Let's stop murdering babies.
For me to apply a wokeometer here.
Wokeometer, not locometer. What's the wokeometer?
I think it really, the future of the UAP is really going to depend on who gets elected to represent the UAP. I really think that, especially on the woke stuff. But they believe, obviously, in maximum freedom. We know that, in liberty. They are mostly free market and seem unwoke. So they're right.
Oh, so they got unwoke and then changed it to unwork.
Okay, I'm going to move now into one party which I have put into the very right-wing category. Notice I started with an extreme left, and that was Socialist Alliance, and then I went into very left. I'm not going to have an extreme right, because I think...
Well, it makes no sense to have an extreme right.
On the extreme right, you need to have something that's equivalent in terms of violence.
Which means that it's not right-wing. Because it's not conservative.
Or in terms of some kind of white supremacist kind of...
Well, that's not right-wing. See, this is where I strongly disagree with Martyn. Martyn is extremely ignorant on this issue. That is not right-wing. You've been brainwashed by the media. You should be awake to this, Martyn.
The view of the world or something like that. We don't have anyone.
That's not conservative. I don't... If you're going to define that as conservative, then conservative, I don't know what conservative means. And then where do I fit?
Like that. In fact, I think they'd be chased out of the nation with pitchforks. But I'd say...
Well, they were at the last federal election. Fraser Anning's party had an element of that white nationalism.
Bordering to the very right is the Great Australian Party. So I'm not bashing them as extremists. I'm just saying that they are proper.
Yeah, so what do they actually believe? So Great Australian Party, GAP.
Fully right wing. They are really not very free market. They're far more protectionist. Otherwise, yeah, maximum freedom. No woke that I can find, but they're pretty silent on a lot of things, like the UAP. There is one thing that gets me, though, and it's the same thing that I think it was the Australian Federation Party had. What is it with these animals should be recognised as sentient beings in law? It's a mental idea, and it's so out of kilter with parties that otherwise, maybe it's trying to attract another kind of voter. I don't know. But legally, I just don't know how that would work. And I just personally, from a theological point of view, think it's wrong. Anyway, it is what it is. Great Australian Party, very right. Now, there are 4 parties that I've just listed here that are kind of like, a couple of them are single issue parties. Federal ICAC now is a single issue party. They just...
Right, so now we get into the single issue parties. You forget what ICAC stands for. Independent Commission Against Corruption. That's what the I stands for. I couldn't think of the I either. But you'd think that you'd be prepared with that. He was probably hoping it would pop into his head.
What, ICAC federally, international,
Independent.
Commission Against Corruption, the...
Yes, independent.
I've forgotten how can I forget what ICAC means? I did, never mind. But they're genuinely single issue. They just want this this anti-corruption body to be set up federally, and it's a very left-wing idea, actually.
I'm not sure that I agree with him that it's a very left-wing idea, because whilst doesn't mean it believing that we do away with all of government. If you set up ICAC so that it's an actual law and order, that it's a justice, it's a part of the judicial system to make sure that there's no corruption anywhere else, and that it doesn't become corrupt itself. So who watches ICAC to make sure they don't become corrupt? Now, how much government do you need to set up to fight corruption? But it is a justice issue. It's law and order, which is what the government should be all about. So I'm not sure that it is a left-wing idea. I think it could be hijacked by the left wing. But I'm not sure I agree that it's a very left-wing idea. I think it could be left-wing, but setting up a commission against corruption, an independent commission against corruption, is not left-wing at all. That's a very right-wing idea. Very conservative idea. Law and order and justice.
Because it says basically more centralised government oversight of government.
No. It's independent. Maybe that's part of the problem. You forgot that the I stands for independent. It's not centralised.
Better government. I think people living in New South Wales might query that. So that's a single issue party. The other single issue party is legalise cannabis.
They just want to legalise cannabis. That's all they care about. I think you might be able to guess where I would put them. Legalise cannabis. Excuse me.
Genuinely just want to legalise cannabis for anyone and everyone. Grow as much as you like, smoke as much as you like, share as much as you like.
Yep, become as brain dead as possible. That's leftist. No conservative would support that. No intelligent conservative.
That's it. And then you have two parties which are narrower in focus. Informed medical options. Not
Informed. Geez, the subtitles in this are awful. Informed medical options. So this is about freedom. This is about not having enforced vaccinations, compulsory vaccination. That's what they're about. It's about freedom.
Single issue, but doesn't have a full-blown suite of policies. But of course, it's all based around the idea that,
and it's a reaction against how overblown the COVID crisis became.
Freedom of choice in vaccinations and things like that. But also they have a pro-life policy, which is rare.
And pro-life. So I'll be ranking them quite highly.
Very interesting, but it seems to tip them over onto I think they're squarely more of the right, whereas the ICAC, I think, is more of the left on the whole.
I disagree, but anyway.
Then you have the seniors unit.
I think they're both right-wing. Depending on how you set the ICAC up, if you have a federal ICAC, you could set it up to be left-wing. So I need more information.
United Party.
Seniors United. Quite a mixture.
quite a mixture, to be honest. Mostly sounds centre-right and conventional, but there's a couple of virtue signalling in there on sort of same-sex marriage, euthanasia, a bit of lefty tax policy.
Not lefty, leftist. Lefty means left-handed.
Probably around coalition-y kind of territory for the Seniors United Party. I haven't covered the Victorian Socialists because they're just similar to Socialist Alliance and they're only in Victoria. I haven't covered the Western Australian Party because I don't know, and they're in WA. Look them up. You might know them. I haven't covered the Jackie Lambie Network, only in Tasmania, and I'll tell you why. Nobody knows how Jackie Lambie thinks. I can't rank her. I just can't. I don't know how the synapses join up, and that's just an absolute fact.
I don't know how the synapses join up. Yeah, it's a problem. Who knows what she thinks? Who knows if she even thinks? Impossible to tell. Who knows what's going on upstairs there?
In fact, I'm not being mean. It's just true. I have no clue what her philosophy is. Probably doesn't have one.
Probably doesn't have one.
And on that note, that is the left to right spectrum. I hope you stuck with me. I hope you noted down all the names of those parties, and I hope it's helpful. So you know what to avoid and what.
Yeah, thank you. It was. And now I will add this as a comment. Put this as a comment on the video. Oh, well, I tried. Okay, well, I think I'm done. To start. And Kevin, if you want to have a talk offline, come and join me in the room. Catch us all next time.